Today we're doing the first ever spark plug change on this '08 FJ Cruiser. I bought it from the original owner and he said the plugs have never been done. It's got about 97,000 miles, so it's about high time we get to that. I'm going to be using these Bosch Iridium plugs. We've got to take off the air cleaner. It's going to be a couple clips. And I'll put the air cleaner in a safe place. Now with the air intake disconnected, we can see we have full access to the 3 spark plugs on this side, so none of this actually needs to come off, contrary to popular belief. So I'm just going to go right down the line. We're going to do one at a time, because I'm pretty sure the wires won't reach any other way than the way that they go, but we just don't want to take the chance at mixing up wires and having the firing order wrong. So we're going to do one at a time. I'll start with the first one. And I'll only show you one because obviously they're all going to be the same. Before removing the coil pack, I'm going to disconnect the electrical connection, which may need to be helped along a little by a screwdriver. I'm just going to take the screwdriver and very gently stick it up. I need 2 hands for this. So I'm having a hard time pushing down this clip far enough just by hand, so I'm going to stick a screwdriver under here. Lightly, very lightly pry up on the connector to pop it off. Now, just as every other bolt on a Japanese-made vehicle seems to be, we're going to use a 10mm on this. And the coil will pull straight out. And there it is. And the spark plug sits down inside this hole. Now before I go at the spark plug, I'm just going to take a flashlight and quickly look in there to make sure there isn't any dirt or debris that worked its way in. Now it shouldn't have, because there is a rubber boot on the coil, but I just want to make sure so that none of that goes into the engine. If there is anything in there, I'll take some compressed air and blow it out, or a vacuum cleaner with a small tube, and suck it out, whatever needs to be done, so that we don't drop those contaminants in the engine. Now, to remove the spark plug, we're going to be using a 5/8" spark plug socket along with a special locking extension. Now, you can see the little tab right here on this extension. Normal extensions have a ball that is spring-loaded and holds a socket to the extension. This one is activated by this lever. Now this is important when we're putting the new spark plug in, because when we go to pull the socket out after the spark plug's tightened, this will lock the extension and the socket together, rather than the conventional extension, which will pop out of the spark plug socket if the spark plug socket has a good grip on the spark plug. This can be done with a regular extension as well. It just takes a little more finesse. After 10 years and 97,000 hard miles, she's free. And we can see I've got the new spark plug loaded into the socket and ready to go. Being that this is an Iridium plug, we don't need to set the gap because it is already set from the manufacturer and we should not mess with it. Now you'll also notice that I did not put any anti-seize on this. This is partially personal preference, partially manufacturer recommendation. And this will vary by spark plug. So these spark plugs, as you can see, kind of have a shiny chrome-like finish on the threads, and this acts as a release agent when the spark plug comes out, so we don't need anti-seize. And often manufacturers of spark plugs will recommend not using anti-seize when it has this coating, because using anti-seize on these threads reduces turning resistance, which is essentially what equates to torque. So it's easy to over-tighten bolts and specifically spark plugs and strip them out or break them by using anti-seize. So this is going in dry. This is how I always install my spark plugs. The only spark plugs that we would theoretically need to use anti-seize on are low-grade spark plugs that have almost a painted finish or a matte finish like bare metal. Other than that, we don't need anti-seize. So in she goes. And we'll just start threading it by hand here. And I'll thread it by hand as far as I can until it stops turning. And then I'll go on to the ratchet. Now, if this was your first time installing spark plugs, you may want to consider getting out a torque wrench and looking up a torque spec on these. But I prefer to tighten them by hand with a regular ratchet because I've done enough of them that I know how they should feel when they're fully seated. Now that that's tightened down, we can move on to the coil. Now you can see there's a little bit of dirt around the rubber boot on the coil. I'm just going to clean that up, and I'm going to put a light coating of silicone paste on it. And that will help to keep dust and dirt out of this hole, help to seal the rubber, and it will help to keep the rubber from drying out as well. Because we really don't want anything down in that hole and end up getting in the engine the next time we change spark plugs. And you can see we've got a light coating of this 3M silicone paste, which is great stuff. Highly recommend it. So I put some around the bottom lip of the rubber piece where it seals against the valve cover, I guess it is, on the engine over here. And I put a very light coating on the rest of the rubber. Now this is kind of a double-edged sword. By putting the paste on here, it's going to collect dirt. And the dirt will only be external to the engine, so it won't affect function. It'll only be cosmetic and a slight nuisance next time we change the spark plugs. But what it will also do is help to keep this rubber from drying out and prevent larger contaminants from getting into the spark plug hole. Now we'll just pop it back in. And we'll just snug this down, keeping in mind that this is a little plastic piece that we don't want to crack, because I'm sure it's not cheap to replace. And we'll plug it back in. Now I'll move to the next over here. We'll put the air cleaner back on, and I'll go on to the other side. So with the passenger side complete, we'll go ahead and move on to the driver's side. And there's a little bit more junk in the way over here. We have 1, 2, and 3 coil packs, and I think we can get at least the outer 2 without removing anything. This middle one is going to be questionable. I'm going to try it, but if I can't get it without removing the bracket, I'll let you all know. So just a quick update on this side. I've got all the plugs replaced at this point. I ended up pulling off this metal bracket that sits right in here. That was 2/3 and that popped right off. And that was necessary to get to this one. And then for the back one, I had to take off this rubber hose right here, which just has 2 spring clamps that are finger tight. Drop those, pull those back a little from the edge, and the hose pops right off, nice and easy. So now I'll just put that bracket back on, and we'll be good to go. I would also like to note that on this side, I use this longer extension with a wobble joint in the middle. That was needed because I didn't remove this top plastic piece. This could, if I didn't have the wobble joint, I could easily remove this in probably about 15 seconds. Okay, maybe 30 seconds, a little bit of an exaggeration, but there's just 2 10mm bolts. Can't really see because it's dark. There's one at the front on each side, and then this thing just lifts up and pulls straight back. You can see the back is just has these tabs in here that hold it in place, and that's all that needs to be removed. But to save the hassle, I just used the wobble joint, and that's it. Now we really didn't need to disassemble much on here. This is my first time doing plugs on one of these engines, and I thought they were going to be a little bit more buried than they were. So on the passenger side, all we needed to do was open up the air box. That's it. And then on this side, we just needed to pull off this bracket and that hose, and that's it over here. So it's much more straightforward than I was expecting. Just looking down at the engine and seeing all the plastic crap all over it. You know, I'm used to older engines where the spark plugs are just, you know, right there. So I was pleasantly surprised on this. So I'll get this bracket back on, and then we'll just give it a quick crank, make sure everything's good to go. Always a good idea to make sure that the engine isn't misfiring or missing cylinders after messing with the spark plugs, and that will be it. And there we go. Purrs like Bob Ross at a tree convention. So one more thing I'd like to note is when I pulled each spark plug out, I labeled which cylinder it came from. So here's number 4, and I'll just run through. To the best of my knowledge, this is the way these cylinders are labeled. Like I said, I'm pretty new to the Toyota engine. Cylinder 1, 3, and 5, working from front to back. We have cylinder 2, 4, and 6. So the reason that I like to do this is because spark plugs tell a story. They can tell a lot about the health of an engine, and by removing the plugs and putting in new ones, you're essentially erasing that history. So if an issue were to arise with the vehicle where plug health could be analyzed or looked at in order to determine the potential cause of the problem, then we've gotten rid of these, we've thrown them away, we don't know where they came from. That can be a problem. So typically I'll mark down which hole the plugs came out of, and I'll hold on to them for a few thousand miles until the new plugs break in. But as we can see, these plugs look great. Looks like a little bit of an excessive gap between the electrode, but to be expected for plugs with 100,000 miles on them, I'd say. We can see got a nice brown color on the porcelain there, or a nice tan color. We don't have excessive buildup of anything really, so just based on this plug alone, I would say the engine's in fairly decent health. And the rest of the plugs look similar to this one as well. But looking at plugs on modern engines is not nearly as important as it was back in the day on, say, carbureted engines, where it could tell you a lot about the fuel mixture, how the carburetor's tuned, too rich, too lean, and give you ideas from there, where modern engines, that's all electronically controlled, and we don't even need to think about it anymore. But I digress. This is a quick install. I hope. We'll see how long the video comes out. But hopefully that was a quick install on these spark plugs. And as usual, thanks for watching. If you liked, enjoyed, if the video was helpful, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you're not already, go hit that subscribe button and subscribe for more FJ stuff to come. Thanks for watching.